issue that we still have to work out. Since I deal a lot with security related issues, it should come as no surprise to you that on the security side, the eastern flank of India, which is constituted by Southeast Asia as well as China, the East Asia, this is a very, very important security theater in a sense from the Indian point of view. One of the important reasons is that over the last several years, India's, if you're looking at India's external economic relations, whether in terms of trade or in terms of investment, you will see that this particular region has in fact become the most dynamic component of India's external economic relations. And again, it should come as no surprise to you that this is being followed by a greater focus on the security dimension of this region, because virtually all the trade that we have with this region is ocean-borne trade. So the safety of the sea lanes, maritime security, this is something which is very important. Freedom of navigation principle is very important. And so over the last few years, this has become a much more important preoccupation for India. What is happening security-wise in this region? Now, we have also seen that there are similar concerns which other countries in the region have, ASEAN itself, but also Japan or Australia or ROK. So over the past few years, we have actually been developing much closer security relations with these countries. So today there is almost like a network of security arrangements with these important regional countries, focused mainly on the maritime domain. And so naval exercises with the United States, with Japan. Japan has also now joined the Malabar exercises, which are multinational exercises. But it's not only the maritime side. We are also, as you know, our relations with Myanmar have become very important, because in a sense, Myanmar is the land gateway for India to Southeast Asia and to ASEAN. And there is a great deal of focus today on connectivity through Myanmar and to Myanmar in order to build an infrastructure for greater expanded trade and investment with the region. So this also has, of course, a security dimension. It has a political dimension. But all in all, I would say that India's preoccupation with the security of the Asia-Pacific region, this has grown in salience over the last few years. India, of course, has significant naval assets which are mainly deployed in the Indian Ocean area. But as our economic profile in this region increases, I would imagine that there would be a greater security profile, also expanding security profile as well. In this case, I would also like to point out that there has been a certain evolution in terms of India's relations with ASEAN, where we are also today looking at the security dimension of our relationship. Ambassador Gopinath Pillai was, we had a 2010 to 2012, we had a ASEAN-India Eminent Persons Group, which I co-chaired from the Indian side. Ambassador Pillai was one of the distinguished members from the ASEAN side to that Eminent Persons Group. And we had a considerable amount of discussion during those meetings of the Eminent Persons Group on issues related to maritime security. And I just wanted to read out to you one small portion from the report of the Eminent Persons Group to the leaders of India and ASEAN with respect to maritime security, because I think This will give you a flavor of how far we have come in terms of working together for what may be considered to be security issues. So I quote from the report, ASEAN member states and India being maritime nations whose prosperity throughout history has been linked to seafaring and seaborne trade, to work together to ensure maritime security and freedom of navigation to all littoral and user countries in accordance with international law and on the basis of open, inclusive, transparent and balanced multilateral arrangements in the region. The agenda for maritime cooperation must include combating piracy, dealing with maritime emergencies, establishing a collaborative early warning system, and providing prompt and effective disaster relief. So this was really the first time that actually this kind of formulation came into an India-ASEAN. I want to just, before concluding, just give you a sense of how we have been looking at this region. Our sense is that this region has done much better in terms of creating a very good economic architecture. I mean, the network of trading relationships in this region, the investment relationships that have been established, the supply chains in which China and the Southeast Asian countries are, of course, the prominent participants. This economic architecture, which is a win-win in a sense for the participants, this has been really at the foundation of the economic prosperity that this region enjoys. But when we come to the security side, we find that a corresponding benign security architecture is missing. So, in terms of how do we deal with some of the issues I mentioned to you, the maritime security aspect, freedom of navigation aspect, there is no overall consensus within the region with respect to how do we deal with some of these issues. I mean, there are long-standing territorial disputes. I mean, you have the divided Korean Peninsula, you have recently another nuclear test by North Korea, which has created a considerable amount of anxiety in countries in the region. There is the continuing issue of China and what it claims as its province, Taiwan, so always potential for some tension in the Taiwan Straits. You have the dispute between China and Japan over the Senkaku Islands, and of course you have now the South China Sea issue with some of the ASEAN countries, but also in terms of freedom of navigation with not just ASEAN countries but a larger number of countries. And how these are to be managed, it is unlikely that these would be resolved, but how in the coming years this can be managed so that there is no spillover in terms of armed conflict in the region. This is a very major challenge. So you have a kind of an asymmetry. Good architecture on the economic side, but maybe on the security side that is still an issue. What we have tried to suggest is that we need to get away from the kind of unilateralism that we see sometimes resorted to by major powers in the region, because it is unilateralism which then creates lack of confidence, lack of trust. So I mentioned in the joint statement that, or in the recommendations of the eminent persons group, the nature of the security architecture should be with the characteristics of being open or being inclusive. That is, all the stakeholders should be represented. It should be transparent so that everybody knows what the other is doing, and it needs to be balanced. This is something which we have been recommending again and again, that this is the kind of architecture which best suits our region. We have been having these discussions with the major stakeholders, whether it is Japan or the United States of America, also with ASEAN countries. And we have now, we have maritime security on the agenda for India-China strategic dialogue as well. And we hope that through these, through this dialogue, we would be able to take this initiative forward. Lastly, I would like to mention that one of the new security issues which has become very prominent over the last few years was international terrorism. Something that India has, of course, has had to deal with for many years, but this is not something now which is just an Indian problem. This is something which has become both a regional issue as well as an international issue. And the need for some consensus again in this region to deal with this challenge is also, to my mind, very important, because I believe that this challenge or this threat is probably going to grow in the coming years rather than diminish. So I would hope that while we are looking at the region, we focus attention on some of these challenges. And India, of course, has a great interest in working together with the countries in the region to try and overcome some of these challenges. So I think I will stop here. Perhaps some of these issues I can take up in the question and answer session. Thank you for your attention.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We welcome you on behalf of ISAS to this workshop. We are very grateful to Mr. Shyam Saran for giving us some of his time and participating in this conference. Mr. Shyam Saran is a very well sought after speaker and a commentator. He is highly in demand in Australia, in China, and many other parts of the world. So when he spares time for us, we feel rather flattered. He has been a good friend. He has come here for more than one event, and he has been listened to with great deal of interest. And so I'm very grateful to Mr. Shyam Saran for being here today. One of the strengths that ISAS has is that we try to get distinguished people like Shyam Saran, Dr. Narayan, we have Vinod Rai, the former CAG, we have Subba Rao, former governor of the bank. It benefits our scholars because they can interact with them and get inside views of things, how certain decisions that we made in the past are based on certain assumptions and so on. So they get an intimate knowledge of the decision making. Second, we are very happy to have them have workshops and seminars and public speeches. So the Singaporeans who are interested, whether it's government service or whether it is business community, interested in South Asia, can listen to people with in-depth knowledge. So this is one of our strengths, and we've developed a fairly good, deep network in South Asia, particularly in India, because in the scheme of things, India gets more attention in our studies than some of the other countries. But some of the others are now, there's greater focus. Shyam has given you his views, and it will be open to you to ask questions, comments, and so on. Maybe I could start out with one more question, and that is your reservations on TPP. You also have bilateral FTAs with a large number of countries. While it's not a bloc, it also tends to have some of the effect of an institution like TPP. 3 days ago, I attended a conference where there's one of the topics discussed was the ASEAN Economic Community and its effect on region and global. Unfortunately, there are 3 speakers, and the 3 speakers were all business people who were very keen to promote their own companies. So we ended up knowing a lot of things about, my friend here, was there, so he may disagree with me, but I felt that the three speakers spoke about their own company. I knew all about how many branches UOB had, or what are the operations of Itochu and Y3 Technologies, but I didn't get any views on what they thought the future of ASEAN community, what are the frustrations, because the chairman kept on asking what are the frustrations. So may I ask Shyam to look at this, the new baby on the block, and that is AEC, Asian Economic Community, and whether India's hesitation or India's reservations on TPP is because you have found it generally, you have always taken a very strident, individualistic approach to international trade discussions. Many participants from other countries have said, oh, we have to deal with India. And they say that they're so smart, it's very difficult to win an argument with them. But it's also very difficult to come to a very good arrangement. I remember under the previous government, the Commerce Minister was passing through Singapore and after one of the talks, and he was triumphantly declaring how most of the things that were proposed could not go through because India had opposed it. So that is this sort of perception. You mentioned this perception problem, but it is perhaps a little more, is deeper than just a perception. It is probably a fact. But is there a possibility that India must look after its own economy, it must look after its own business. But India's businessmen have matured. Some of the private sector companies have now, of global standards, they can compete, but they are using this, maybe not a very good thing to say to a guest, but I think they use the Indian domestic market as their bedrock on which they build everything else. So everything else they can do what they want because you have this huge domestic market. I'm not sure whether that's correct or not. So, Shyam, if you could just comment on this, then I'll open it to others.
Thank you. As I mentioned, the issue with respect to TPP is that number one, it is dealing with issues that go beyond, just trade. For example, with respect to intellectual property, I think the argue is that it is putting in place intellectual property standards which, given the current stage of India's development, can be a major constraint. Now, I mean, one can have different views about this, but there is an issue. I mean, as you know, the Indian pharmaceutical sector has, for example, serious doubts about how this will impact on their interests. There is also a problem in terms of, what is the kind of trade-off that we can have with our partners. Naturally, in any kind of negotiation of that kind, you try to see how you can leverage what your strengths are and how you can try and neutralize what your weaknesses may be. Part of the problem is that the perception on the Indian side is that in areas where we do have some competitive strength, whether it is in pharmaceuticals, whether it is on various services, like for example IT, while our partners want to have access to the Indian domestic market, which is very large, when it comes to giving us access in areas where we have some strength, we do not. So, take for example pharmaceuticals. The non-tariff barrier there is registration of your pharmaceutical products. So you do not say that I will not allow Indian pharmaceutical goods to come in, but that you have to conform to these standards. You make certain that those standards are such that registration becomes a very long, drawn out affair. In India itself, the behavior of some of the pharmaceutical companies, not all, but some of the large pharmaceutical companies from abroad, what is called evergreen. This is an issue. One cannot say that India is not being reasonable about IPR issue. So sometimes we find that the concerns that we come up with are very dismissed out of hand, but then a great deal is made of India not giving access. So because if this is something, there is a trade-off where we have to ensure that both sides. Now, in some of the free trade agreements or the comprehensive economic partnership agreement that we have had, there are issues on how they have actually been implemented. So if we say banking sector is open to both sides, but when Indian banks want to come and open branches, then we find that whole set of issues are put on the table, which makes certain that Indian banks actually cannot come and open branches. So there is a certain reason why sometimes India may appear to be not as enthusiastic as people expect it to be. I agree with you. There are Indian companies who have done very well internationally. So I don't think they have a problem in competing, but I think they also have a point when they say there should be some level playing field for us as well. With the United States, you've seen recently huge hike in visa fees. It is quite, they will say, no, this is not a trade limiting measure. Or the controversy which comes up about Indians taking away jobs from Americans or from the Europeans. Why should this not be treated as just a trade in services? It's not taking away jobs. I can also say if your insurance company comes to India, then it takes away my jobs. That argument is not accepted by the United States. But when it comes to IT services, that is the argument which is made a lot of the time. So I'm saying this not as trying to defend India's position, but I'm saying that the situation is a little more complex than perhaps appears in public. And I take it for granted that when you are negotiating, you sometimes try to show the other side as being obstructive. It is part of the negotiating process. I have been through that during climate change negotiations where, we were always the bad boy. The Indians are the ones who are, preventing consensus. The Indians are the ones who are standing in the way. In Copenhagen, of course, China took over from us at the last moment. They became the bad boy in the negotiations. But, most of us who do these negotiations are quite conscious of the fact that this is part of the negotiating tactic. But I think for us, it is also important to get away from that and see what is behind it and whether or not there are ways in which what are genuine concerns on the Indian side are also looked at rather than being dismissed out of hand. And you will find that on the Indian side, there will be a willingness to look at how we can bring benefit to the other side also. To be fair, starting from 1990, if you see the trajectory that India has traversed, it has come a very, very long way. You cannot have a trade of something like $700 billion or $800 billion if India was a closed economy. Look at the kind of cross investment which has been taking place. So I think it is not such a bleak picture as it is made out to be. I grant that there are more expectations of India. India has not quite met all the expectations which our partners have. That's okay. We could have perhaps done better. But I would also like our partners to look at the fact that India has actually made a very, very big change in the manner in which globalization of the Indian economy is no longer an issue. Everyone accepts that globalization of the Indian economy has been good for India. And that greater globalization will be better for India. And this is at a time when, by the way, it is not so clear as far as many other major, economies in the world are concerned. I would say that with respect to some of the concerns which are there about India taking certain strong positions, any country which has certain vital interests will take strong positions. I consider, having been negotiator myself before, I think it is important that if there are not only India's interests involved, but what we see as what could be a good architecture for international trade or for investment. It is important that there should be dissenting voices also, which should be brought to the table. That is how we progress, rather than just accept what a certain orthodoxy may. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll open it to the House and can I start with
Ambassador, thank you very much for that frank and illustrative address. One of the issues which is determining the context of this workshop that we are doing here is what you mentioned right at the beginning of your address. India's fairly dedicated interest in becoming a member of the APEC. And in that context, you have been a part of the initiative looking at this. I wanted to have your comments on what is being increasingly perceived as a dichotomy within the Indian policy-making spectrum. Indian foreign policy of late has been a robust foreign policy. There has been a lot of strategic engagement of the major movers and shakers among the APEC countries, the US, Australia, Japan, China, Singapore, a large number of them. And the expectation is that when it comes to APEC membership, there will be the strategic backing of these major members pushing India into the club. But that backing is contingent upon a far more proactive and open trade policy on part of India. And I gather that the larger APEC view is that these two are not moving hand in hand. Indian foreign policy is robust, charged, very engaging, but Indian trade policy is way behind what the foreign policy would want to be committed and visited. So, do you see this contradiction remaining and continuing?
Let me caution you and caution other members of APEC that membership of India of APEC should not become a negotiating team. That is, if you want to, like the United States, very frankly I would say, United States, after having given the political commitment that it would support India's membership of APEC, now when you actually get down to how do we go about it, there are voices in the US which say, unless you sign the BIT with us, why should we sponsor you for APEC? Some other partners say, there is this trade issue which is there between us, unless this is resolved, why should we sponsor you for APEC? That will not work. Because we are not in a negotiating forum. I said the reason why APEC is important for India, significant for India, is precisely because it is not a negotiating forum. Now, if the membership of India to APEC becomes in fact a factor in the very difficult trade negotiations which we are doing with various countries, then we might as well in those negotiations itself do the horse trading rather than let this become a new pressure point on India. So I think what has to be recognized is I acknowledge that this is good for India. Membership of APEC is good for India. I think it is important for APEC to realize whether or not India's membership of APEC is good for APEC. If it is not good for APEC, then there doesn't need to be any further debate about this. But is India's membership of APEC good for APEC? And I will say why it is good for APEC. One, as I mentioned, with respect to this region, India is a very large economy. It is now a 2 trillion economy. It is the fastest growing economy, large economy in the region. And therefore it can bring benefits to other economies in the region. I would also mention that many of the apprehensions that we have about, say, TPP or some of the other trade arrangements is because of lack of familiarity with, for example, regulatory issues, standards, norms. Our business community is not as exposed to these kind of benchmarks as many other countries in the region, business communities in the region. It would be very useful if business community in India is in fact exposed to how this evolution of benchmarks take place. These are still aspirational. We have, as I said, they have not got to a point where it is a negotiating trade body. But it is a very influential body because if those benchmarks, if those standards are something which are discussed and countries are allowed to aspire to those standards with a certain degree of comfort level. I think for India that is very important because if you have that kind of exposure, not only of your business community but of your civil society, of your governments, to how this is done and why it is of advantage. It is good for India to conform to some of those standards. It would help our trade interest if we conform to that, rather than look upon this as not tariff barriers. So how do you, if the idea is that India, we should also work to change the Indian mindset, and particularly the business mindset, what better way than to expose Indian business, Indian government to the manner in which, very successful manner in which APEC works. Rather than to see, these fellows want to get into APEC. Now this is a good opportunity to try and extract something from there. If that is the approach, then it is not worthwhile for India to win. I'm being very, very, very frank. So this is something that you have to take a call. Whether you see this as something which is mutually beneficial or this is something which you are doing as a favor to India. If you look upon this as doing a favor to India, then there will be a problem. But if you look upon it something where India also can contribute, India can also bring something to the table of benefit to you, then it's a different story.
I have only 5 minutes. Indra, he's quite strict on timing. So I think we can have one, maybe 2 questions. And I'd like to get a non-ISAS person to ask a question. So there will be too many. I think you had a question. Yes, please.
Thank you, Ambassador. You pointed to some reservations on...
Introduce yourself.
My name is Ganesh Vengaraju from the Asian Development Bank.
Yes.
You had some reservations on TPP. They asked you about the agreement that India is very much a part of the RCEP, and what you think are the prospects, and then particularly in that, how do you see India and China relations within that? Thank you.
Well, I think I briefly touched upon that. Of course, we have a great interest in the RCEP, and in particular because of TPP. I think this is become more important in that sense. So we would like to see a successful conclusion of the RCEP. But just as some of the other negotiating partners have certain reservations about some sectors, we do too. So I mentioned to you the fact that we have a comprehensive economic partnership agreement with Singapore. We have with Japan. We have with a free trade agreement with ASEAN itself. We do not have one with China. So in a sense, what RCEP with China included will do is that in effect it becomes like a free trade agreement between India and China. Now it is how to deal with that particular challenge, which is something that is preoccupying us. How do we make certain that the RCEP, the manner in which it is formulated, does give us some satisfaction in terms of not just the import of Chinese goods into the Indian market, which is already quite substantial. As you know, we have a major trade deficit with China. But whether or not, more importantly, are our partners ready to give us access to those areas which I mentioned, where we have competitive strength? Because after all, the logic of joining this is precisely so that we get an expanded market. Not that our partners have an expanded market in India, but we do not have an expanded market in our partner countries. So this is something which, rather than looking at it negatively, that we want to keep people out from the Indian market, more important is how much are our partners willing to give us space where we have competitive strength. So there are sectors which we are working on. I think perhaps Vishwajit later on can perhaps spell that out. But there are areas where we like to have better access to markets amongst our partner countries. In particular China. Because we do have issues with China with respect to, for example, pharmaceuticals. We do have problems with respect to IT. So how we deal with some of these issues will be very important in terms of how much progress we are able to make in the RC.
Sorry, ladies and gentlemen, I have to call it a day because we have a coffee break now. You can make sure Shyam Saran doesn't get a chance to drink coffee. That's one option you have. But I have to say that we'll now break off. And I want to thank Shyam for his very interesting speech and, as Amit Chandu said, a very frank response to questions. Thank you very much. Coffee break is for 15 minutes.